Hello and welcome to the Environmental Awareness Training Program for the McKenzie Road Bridge Replacement Project. This training is provided by Alluvian Biological Consulting. Now this training has four broad objectives. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be familiar with all four of these points. First, we're going to cover the definition and implications of take. Then we'll move on to your responsibilities if you encounter a regulated species. We'll have a brief introduction to the protected species associated with this project, and then we'll go over some general mitigation measures that need to be followed in order to prevent any incidents of take. We'd like to emphasize that this training is meant to supplement, not replace, the training information handouts that you should have received before watching this video. If you have not received a training pamphlet or booklet, please request one from your supervisor or on-site alluvian biologist. Let's start by discussing take. Take is a broadly defined term, and under the Federal Endangered Species Act, take means to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, capture, collect, or attempt to engage in any such conduct. Now, penalties for take will vary from species to species. However, any individual found to be committing unsanctioned take may be dealt hefty fines, and in some cases up to a year in jail time. These penalties are assessed for each instance of unsanctioned take. So what should you do if you encounter a regulated species on the project? The first thing you should do is ensure that you do not touch or approach the animal. You should then immediately suspend work within the area the animal was found, especially if that work would result in take. Your next step is to notify your supervisor or the on-site biologist. If a biologist is not on site, please contact Peter Harmon at the number listed on this slide and in your training materials. Unless otherwise noted in this presentation, a 100-foot no-work buffer will need to be established around the species of concern until it either moves off the project site of its own volition or until permission is received from regulatory agencies to reduce or eliminate the no-work buffer. The next few slides will give you a brief overview of all of the listed and regulated species that occur on this project site. Tricolored blackbird is a medium-sized passerine bird with a conical beak. Male breeding plumage is almost entirely black, but they also carry a distinctive red shoulder patch bordered by white fringe. This species is found throughout the Central Valley and a few coastal environments within and south of Sonoma County. Tricolored blackbirds can be found nesting in freshwater wetland vegetation as well as agricultural fields. Their diet consists primarily of insects and seeds. This species forms the largest nesting colonies of any passerine bird, with a 10-acre area containing between 50 to 20,000 nests. Nests are built in dense vegetation with plenty of cover. Breeding takes place from mid-April to late July, and females rear up to 2 broods of 4 chicks per nesting season. Incubation lasts up to 2 weeks, with another 2 weeks required for nestlings to fledge. If a breeding colony of tricolored blackbirds is found on the project site, a mandatory 300-foot no-work buffer will need to be established around this colony until it is deemed inactive. Swainson's hawk is a medium to large-sized hawk with adults getting up to 21 inches in length with 52-inch wingspans. Their plumage is variable, and there are usually 2 color morphs. The first morph is a light phase, which have dark heads, breast bands, and light bellies, while the dark phase birds are going to be sooty black. Both color phases have bicolored underwings, dark gray flight feathers, lighter wing linings, a broad tail, and long, relatively narrow pointed wings. In March and April, they arrive on breeding grounds in the Solano and Central Valley counties, as well as the interior valleys of the coastal ranges. Breeding habitat includes woodlands, savanna, grasslands, and scattered trees. Swainson's hawk require large tracts of grassland and open land for which to forage. During migration and foraging, they use open lowlands, and these hawks typically occur at elevations from sea level to 1,500 feet. Northwestern pond turtle is a medium-sized turtle. The color ranges anywhere between brown to olive brown to blackish, and the shell is going to be anywhere between 3.5 to 8.5 inches long. The species can be identified from the lines and spots that radiate from the center of the scutes, and the scutes are the bony plates that make up the shell of this animal. Males of this species tend to have a light throat and no markings, and a relatively flat shell, and females are going to have dark markings around their throat and have a noticeably taller shell. The species typically inhabits ponds and creeks and hibernates underwater for several months during the winter. Western pond turtles reach breeding age at about 8 to 10 years of age. Breeding usually takes place in April and May, and what females will do is they'll climb onto land on the water margin and dig a nest. They'll lay a clutch of around 2 to 11 eggs, and those eggs will gestate for about 80 to 100 days before they'll hatch. Giant garter snakes, true to their name, are the largest species of garter snakes, with adults measuring 36 to 65 inches long. Individuals usually range in color from brown to olive to black, but all typically exhibit a dorsal yellow stripe that runs down the length of their body, as well as a lighter yellow stripe on each side of their body. Their underbelly is typically gray to brown in color, and this species is highly aquatic, preferring marshes, drainage canals, rice fields, and other wetland habitat to hunt and take refuge. They eat primarily fish, tadpoles, and frogs, and the breeding season for this species is approximately 2 months, usually between March and April. Females give birth to live young, which can be anywhere between 10 to 46 young per brood, and this usually takes place in July through September. Giant garter snakes go dormant during the winter season, usually using an animal burrow to take refuge until the following spring. A variety of bird species have been found nesting in or immediately adjacent to Caltrans right-of-ways. Nest sites are often placed in crevices, cavities, seams, or weep holes within bridges. Other nests are constructed on open vertical cement surfaces on bridges. The species that utilize man-made structures as nest sites tend to be more tolerant of urban conditions, otherwise known as increased noise, light, vibration, and even human presence. But they can nonetheless be sufficiently disturbed during construction or maintenance activities to cause nest abandonment or inattentiveness, which would result in the death or loss of eggs or juveniles. Incubation and brood rearing require approximately 4 to 5 weeks for smaller birds, but can take up to 12 weeks for larger birds like raptors. Any active bird nests found within or adjacent to the project area will require a mandatory 100-foot no-work buffer until it can be confirmed that the chicks have fledged and left the nest. Any raptor nests will require a 500-foot no-work buffer. Now we'll go over some of the key species protection measures for this project. These slides won't comprise an exhaustive list of necessary protective measures, but they should give you a good idea of what's expected of you. There are several general protective measures that need to be followed on this project. I'll go over these quickly, but you should review these measures in your training materials. First of all wildlife should be allowed to leave the job site unharmed, and this includes any animals that don't carry state or federal protections. Also, to prevent wildlife entrapment on the project, all excavations, and this includes trenches, holes, and pits, as well as all pipes and hoses, need to be covered at the end of each workday. If covering an excavation isn't practical, earthen or wooden escape ramps need to be installed along each end of the excavation. Additionally, all food-related waste generated on the site needs to be contained in sealed trash containers. These containers need to be removed from the site daily, and the reason we do this is because food waste attracts wildlife to the site, which could ultimately cause project delays. So the environmentally sensitive areas on this project should be clearly marked and fenced, and no work is allowed in these areas. And if the ESA fencing is knocked down or damaged for any reason, it needs to be repaired immediately. And during construction operations, stockpiling of construction materials, portable equipment, vehicles, and supplies needs to be restricted to the designated construction staging areas. These areas must be located in an upland habitat and may not cover riparian vegetation or leave material where it may be washed into a water body. Drip pans or absorbent materials must be placed underneath all vehicles parked in these staging areas. On top of the general protection measures, there are a few protection measures that need to be followed in order to prevent unnecessary impacts to aquatic and terrestrial habitats within the project boundaries. To start, in order to protect aquatic habitats, best management practices, or BMPs, need to be employed in any instance where there is a risk of discharging sediment or hazardous materials into the soil or a nearby water body. All BMPs should be inspected immediately before and immediately after storms, and BMPs may include any number of devices, including gravel bags, silt fence, and straw wattle. However, the use of monofilament netting in any BMP is prohibited. Additionally, no equipment or construction materials should enter any part of the stream with flowing water. If any equipment is operated near the stream bank, it must be inspected for leaks and be in good working order. On the flip side, in order to protect terrestrial habitats within or adjacent to the project, certain restrictions have been placed on vegetation removal. The on-site biologist may have flagged or otherwise marked some sensitive vegetation within the project area, and this vegetation must be avoided during construction. Additionally, all other vegetation removal should be restricted to the minimum necessary to complete the project. We'll finish up here with some important takeaways from this presentation. Perhaps the most important takeaway is remembering what your responsibilities are if you see a regulated species within the project site. Don't touch or approach regulated wildlife and immediately report encounters to your supervisor or the on-site biologist. Keep your training materials somewhere where you can readily access them. If an animal wanders onto the construction site and you're unsure whether it's a cause for concern, your booklets contain the necessary contact information and procedures to follow in order to protect yourself and your company. It is important to remember that you and your company are wholly responsible for following the measures in this training video and its associated training materials, as well as the permits and specifications for this project. So please revisit this video and your training materials as needed. This concludes the Biological Resources Information Program training video. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions about what's been covered in this presentation or your training materials, please direct them to your on-site alluvian biologist.